The Puppeteer's Curse. Maggie had always been fascinated by the old puppet theater on the outskirts of town. Abandoned for decades, it loomed like a forgotten relic of a bygone era, its paint peeling and windows boarded up. But there was something about it, something that drew her in like a moth to a flame. One autumn afternoon, Maggie found herself standing in front of the theater's decaying entrance. The air was thick with the scent of damp wood and rotting fabric. She hesitated, her heart pounding in her chest. Then, with a deep breath, she pushed open the door. The interior was just as she had imagined. Rows of dusty seats, a stage draped in tattered velvet, and marionettes hanging from the ceiling like lifeless corpses. As she stepped inside, the door creaked shut behind her, plunging the theater into darkness. Maggie fumbled for her flashlight, the beam slicing through the thick gloom. She made her way to the stage, her footsteps echoing eerily in the silence. She had heard rumors, whispers of a puppeteer who had gone mad, of marionettes that moved on their own, and of those who entered the theater never returning. But Maggie wasn't one to believe in ghost stories. She was here for the thrill, for the adrenaline rush of exploring the unknown. As she reached the stage, she noticed something strange. One of the marionettes was different from the others. It was newer, its strings taut and its wooden face polished. Curiosity got the better of her, and she reached out to touch it. The moment her fingers brushed against the puppet, she felt a sudden chill, as if the temperature had dropped by several degrees. The puppet's head jerked toward her, its glassy eyes locking onto hers. Maggie stumbled back, her heart racing. She could have sworn the puppet had moved on its own. But that was impossible, wasn't it? She shook her head, trying to shake off the growing sense of unease. It was just an old puppet, she told herself. There was nothing to be afraid of. But then the puppet's mouth began to move. It opened slowly, as if struggling to speak. Maggie watched in horror as it whispered in a voice that was not its own. A voice that was deep, raspy, and filled with malice. "Leave!" Maggie's blood ran cold. She turned to flee, but the puppet's strings lashed out, wrapping around her wrists and ankles like iron shackles. She struggled, but the strings tightened, pulling her toward the stage. She screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the darkness. The marionettes hanging from the ceiling began to twitch, their limbs jerking to life. One by one, they turned their heads to face her, their eyes glowing with a sinister light. The puppet at the center of the stage cackled, its laughter echoing through the empty theater. "Welcome to the show," it hissed. Maggie's screams grew louder as the strings pulled her closer to the stage. The marionettes began to dance, their movements stiff and unnatural, like a grotesque parody of life. The puppet's laughter grew louder, filling her ears with its maddening sound. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, everything went silent. The strings released her, and she collapsed to the floor, gasping for breath. When she looked up, the puppet was gone, and the theater was empty once more. But Maggie knew that she was not alone. The curse of the puppeteer had claimed her, just as it had claimed so many before her. She would never leave this theater. She was now a part of the show, a marionette, trapped forever in the puppeteer's twisted play. The Harvest Moon's shadow. Eli lived on the outskirts of a small, isolated farming village, where traditions ran deep and the land was both a blessing and a curse. Every autumn, when the harvest moon rose high in the sky, the villagers held a festival to celebrate the end of the growing season. But there was another, darker tradition that few spoke of, a ritual to appease the spirits of the land, who, it was said, demanded a sacrifice every year to ensure the village's continued prosperity. As the time for the harvest festival approached, Eli noticed a change in the air. The animals grew restless, crops withered inexplicably, and the nights became unnervingly quiet. The older villagers spoke in hushed tones about the shadow of the harvest moon, a presence that loomed over the village, watching, waiting. One evening, as the moon reached its fullest, Eli's father summoned him to the barn. His face was pale, his eyes filled with a sadness Eli had never seen before. "It's time, Eli," he said, his voice trembling. "You must go to the old oak tree at the edge of the field. The spirits, they have chosen you." Eli's heart sank. He had heard the stories, of course, the tales of those who had been chosen never to be seen again. But he had never believed them, dismissing them as mere superstition. Now, standing in the barn with his father, the weight of those stories crashed down on him like a tidal wave. "I won't go," Eli said, his voice shaking with fear, but his father shook his head. "You must," he replied, his voice heavy with resignation. "The spirits demand it. If you don't, the crops will fail and the village will starve." Eli felt a deep pit of dread forming in his stomach, but he knew he had no choice. The fate of the entire village rested on his shoulders. With a heavy heart, he made his way to the old oak tree, the harvest moon casting an eerie glow over the fields. As he approached the tree, he saw something that made his blood run cold. A figure was standing in the shadows, its form barely visible in the moonlight. Eli's breath caught in his throat as the figure stepped forward, revealing a face twisted with rage and pain. It was a spirit, one of the many who had been sacrificed before him. "Why have you come?" the spirit hissed, its voice filled with anguish. "Why do you give yourself to the curse?" Eli couldn't speak, paralyzed by fear. The spirit reached out, its hand passing through Eli's chest, filling him with an unbearable cold. "You are not the first," it whispered, "and you will not be the last. The village will never be free, for the land is cursed. The spirits will always demand more." Tears welled up in Eli's eyes as he realized the terrible truth. The village's prosperity was built on a lie, a cycle of sacrifice and suffering that would never end. He had been chosen not by the spirits, but by the villagers themselves, desperate to escape their own fate. The spirit's grip tightened, pulling Eli closer. "Join us," it whispered, "and become one with the land. Your sacrifice will be remembered until the next." With those words, the spirit dragged Eli into the shadows, his screams swallowed by the night. The harvest moon shone down, its light cold and unforgiving, as the village continued its celebration, unaware of the darkness that had claimed yet another soul. And so the cycle continued. The village would thrive for another year, but the price had been paid. The shadow of the harvest moon lingered, waiting patiently for the next sacrifice. A sacrifice that would never end, as long as the villagers believed in the curse. The faceless ones, in the heart of a dense forest, far from the reach of civilization, lay a forgotten village. This village was different from others. Its inhabitants were known as the Faceless Ones. They were not born without faces, but over time, their features would slowly fade until nothing remained. No eyes, no mouth, just smooth, featureless skin. Eva, a researcher in folklore, had heard whispers of this mysterious village and its cursed inhabitants. Her curiosity led her to seek it out, despite warnings from the locals. They spoke of the village as a place of despair, where the curse of the faceless ones would consume any who ventured too close. But Eva was determined to uncover the truth. After days of trekking through the dense forest, Eva finally found the village. It was eerily quiet, the only sound being the rustling of leaves in the wind. The houses were old and dilapidated, with vines creeping up their walls. As she entered the village, she felt a chill run down her spine. There was something terribly wrong about this place. She walked through the empty streets, her eyes scanning the surroundings for any sign of life. But there was nothing, no movement, no voices. It was as if the village had been abandoned long ago. But then she saw them, the villagers. They stood in the shadows, watching her, their faces hidden in the darkness. Eva's heart raced as she approached one of them. "Hello?" she called out, her voice trembling. The figure stepped into the light, revealing a face that was smooth and featureless, like a blank canvas. Eva gasped, taking a step back. The villager raised a hand, pointing toward the center of the village, where a large stone altar stood. Eva felt an overwhelming sense of dread, but she couldn't turn back now. She followed the villager's silent command, making her way to the altar. As she got closer, she noticed strange symbols carved into the stone, symbols that seemed to pulsate with a dark energy. She reached out to touch the altar, but as soon as her fingers made contact with the cold stone, a wave of darkness washed over her. Her vision blurred, and she felt a sharp pain in her head, as if something was being ripped from her. She screamed, but no sound came out. When the darkness finally receded, Eva found herself lying on the ground. She struggled to her feet, her body weak and trembling. She looked around, but the villagers were gone. The village was empty once more, as if nothing had happened. But something had changed. Eva reached up to touch her face, and her heart sank. Her features were gone. Her eyes, her mouth, her nose. Everything had been erased. She was now one of them, a faceless one. She tried to scream, to cry out for help, but there was nothing. The curse had taken her, just as it had taken the villagers before her. She was trapped in the village, doomed to wander its empty streets for eternity, her identity lost to the darkness. As the days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, Eva's memories began to fade. She could no longer remember who she was, where she had come from, or why she was there. All she knew was the emptiness, the overwhelming void that consumed her. And so, she became a part of the village, another faceless figure in the shadows, waiting for the next curious soul to stumble upon the cursed place. The village was never truly empty. It was filled with the lost, the forgotten, the faceless. And now Eva was one of them. The echoes of Black Hollow, deep in the Appalachian Mountains, hidden away from the world, lies Black Hollow, a place shrouded in mystery and fear. The locals avoid it, telling stories of those who ventured into the hollow and never returned, their voices forever lost to the wind. The hollow is said to be cursed, its very air thick with the weight of forgotten souls. Logan had always been drawn to the unknown, his curiosity leading him to places others feared. When he heard about Black Hollow, he knew he had to see it for himself. The idea of a place so deeply feared only fueled his determination. Ignoring the warnings of the villagers, he set out on a cold autumn morning, determined to uncover the truth behind the legend. The path to Black Hollow was treacherous, overgrown with thorny bushes and gnarled roots that seemed to reach out, trying to pull him back. As Logan ventured deeper into the forest, the trees grew taller and denser, their twisted branches blotting out the sky. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves or the distant call of a crow. After hours of hiking, Logan finally reached the entrance to the hollow. It was a narrow, dark chasm between two towering cliffs, barely wide enough for him to squeeze through. As he stepped inside, the air grew colder, and a strange pressure began to build in his chest. The sunlight that had filtered through the trees above was now completely gone, leaving him in near darkness. Logan switched on his flashlight, the beam cutting through the thick fog that clung to the ground. The hollow was eerily quiet, the only sound being the crunch of leaves beneath his boots. But then, as he ventured further, he began to hear something else. Whispers. Faint, almost indistinguishable, like echoes carried on the wind. He stopped, straining to listen, but the whispers grew louder, more insistent. They were coming from all around him, filling the hollow with a cacophony of voices. Logan's heart began to race as the whispers turned into cries, desperate, pleading cries for help. He spun around, his flashlight beam darting across the walls of the hollow. But there was no one there. "Who's there?" Logan called out, his voice trembling. But the only response was the echo of his own voice, distorted and twisted as it bounced off the walls of the hollow. The whispers grew louder, closer, until they were deafening. Logan covered his ears, trying to block out the sound, but it was no use. The voices were inside his head, clawing at his sanity. Panic set in, and Logan began to run, desperate to escape the hollow. But no matter how fast he ran, the whispers followed, relentless and unyielding. He could feel something behind him, closing in, a presence that chilled him to the bone. He didn't dare look back, fearing what he might see. As he reached the end of the hollow, Logan stumbled and fell, his flashlight slipping from his grasp. It rolled away, the beam flickering before it went out, plunging him into darkness. The whispers were now all around him, so loud that they drowned out his own thoughts. He tried to get up, but his limbs felt heavy, as if they were being held down by unseen hands. And then he felt it, a cold, clammy touch on his shoulder. Logan froze, terror gripping him as the whispers ceased all at once, replaced by a single, clear voice. "Welcome to Black Hollow," it whispered in his ear, a voice that was both familiar and alien. Logan's blood ran cold as he realized whose voice it was. It was his own. Before he could react, the ground beneath him gave way, and he was plunged into darkness. The last thing he heard before everything went black was the sound of his own voice, echoing through the hollow, joining the countless others that had been lost to its curse. When the villagers came looking for Logan, all they found was his abandoned flashlight at the edge of the hollow, its battery long dead. They knew better than to venture inside, knowing that Black Hollow had claimed another soul. The echoes of Logan's voice would haunt the hollow forever, a warning to those who might dare to follow in his footsteps. And so, the legend of Black Hollow lived on, a place where the voices of the lost and the forgotten would echo for eternity, trapped in the shadows of the cursed hollow.